Nobody warned us about the scarecrow before we moved here. My parents decided to move to this town on a whim. There is no better explanation. They were fed up with the high prices of rent in the city. In Sutton, they could afford a whole house with 3 bedrooms. I had my own room, they had theirs, and we even had an extra room for guests that would never come. My parents didn't know that then, though. The town was cute enough at first. Small center with shops and a marketplace. We also quickly realized that the people here loved all sorts of community activities, fruit and vegetable contests, a celebration for each season, and regular town meetings. Everything they could think of to distract themselves from what was wrong with the town. I wasn't happy with the decision to move at first, but budged when I saw how happy it made my parents. Besides, I only had 1 year of school left and was already planning to move away for college. We couldn't have known that I never would. We moved here on the 1st of October, 1 year ago, and were quickly welcomed by most of our neighbors. The first ones were the Millers, who lived right next door to us, Mr. and Mrs. Miller came over with a huge wooden basket filled with all kinds of baked goods and massive smiles on their faces that never seemed to disappear. We were busy unpacking the boxes in our living room when they knocked on our door. Mom went to open it while Dad and I listened to the voices. "Oh, what a wonderful decision you made by buying this house," we heard the woman say. "And at the most perfect time as well. We saw that you have a daughter. She looks about the age of our Ethan. Oh, maybe he can tell her about all the fun a young person can have in Sutton." The father spoke faster than a normal person should. Mom didn't get a single word in. "Yes, wouldn't that be wonderful? The 3 of you should come to dinner sometime. We would love to introduce you to our town," the mother continued. "Have you met Harry yet?" Slowly, Dad got up and walked towards the door. "Oh, you must be the husband, hello." My parents were city people. I could tell they were already overwhelmed by the warmth of the people and couldn't help but grin. When the Millers left, we started snacking on all the goods they brought, but were interrupted every couple of minutes by new neighbors bringing more stuff. After the last ones, my dad closed the door and sighed. The 3 of us looked at each other for a moment and then started laughing. "This will take a lot of adjustment," my mom giggled. "But it could be worse, right?" "Well, at least we didn't have to worry about lunch or dinner today," I added. We had a bunch of casseroles, pies, and salads. Everyone brought us something. "They are a little peculiar but nice, I guess," Dad said. "I'm sure we'll get used to it. And a bunch of parents are already planning friendships between you and their kids, Avery. You're already so popular," he joked. "Yeah, maybe I can become Harry's friend." "Oh yes, what was that about?" my mom asked. They all talked about this Harry person, but nobody ever told us who he actually is. "Maybe the mayor." Due to the fall holidays, I would wait to start school. I also wasn't planning on growing friendships here. I had my friends at home after all. So I spent those days with my parents. The next day I went to the grocery store with my mom so we could stock up on everything we didn't have yet. We walked to the town center, which only took us 10 minutes to the store one of our neighbors recommended. I expected a real grocery store, but it was more like this tiny kiosk with only the most essentials. They had no name brands and were mostly stocked with vegetables and dairy items. The woman behind the register gave us a big smile. "Wonderful choice of items you made here. You know, everything we sell is produced locally." "Oh, that's nice," my mother said. "Yes, it is. Isn't it? Even stuff like toilet paper?" I asked. "Well, no, not everything, but almost everything. We do not rely on the outside much, and we don't need to." "Harry wouldn't like that," she whispered in that last sentence. Mom and I exchanged a curious look. "Yes, well, who exactly is this Harry? We keep hearing that name and..." Mom stopped speaking when she saw the face of the woman change completely. She'd lost all color. "You will learn soon enough, but hopefully not too soon. Just remember, we all stick together here." This confused us even more, but the woman wouldn't answer any more of our questions. Instead, she tried distracting us with all sorts of information about the upcoming fall festival. I wish she would have been right and that we would have had more time. But as it happened, I saw Harry that night. My parents had already gone to bed. The street was so quiet that you could have heard a pin drop outside. I was in my room watching a show when I heard footsteps, if you can call them that. It sounded more like someone dragging themselves over the floor. I walked over to the window but couldn't see much at first. The street was dark. All the lights in the houses were out. I'd noticed people pulling down their shades earlier in the evening already, but as my eyes adjusted better, I saw where the sound was coming from. I saw a man in ripped clothes with something that looked like straw hanging out from his arms and legs. His movements seemed awkward and slow. His body was all crooked and bent, almost as if he were hurt. But every now and then he would slightly change directions, going in a zigzag line. I couldn't really see his face until he stopped, right in front of our house, and started looking up at my window. Suddenly, I was painfully aware that my room was the only one around with a light on. My breathing got heavier, but the rest of my body was frozen. And that's when my door opened and my light was shut off. I tried to scream, but no sound came out, and suddenly a hand pulled me out of my room and into the hallway. It was Dad. "Did you see that?" he whispered. I saw Mom standing in front of their bedroom door. I nodded, not really able to speak. "What a freak," my mother said. "Joanna, I'm just saying, it's the middle of the night. He looks like he's on drugs." "Why did you pull me out here?" I asked, my voice finally back. I didn't want to admit that my parents might be as scared as me. We saw him looking up. "And when we came to the hallway, your light was on." "He was looking at you," my mom whispered. Dad walked back to my room, and after a while, he said he's gone. When morning came, the three of us had calmed down. In the daylight, our fear of the prior night seemed ridiculous. "It was probably just a drunk guy coming home from an early Halloween party," Dad said during breakfast. "Yeah," I agreed. I still didn't like the way he stared at me, though. Mom kept rearranging the scrambled eggs on her plate, not really eating anything. "Do you think that man was Harry?" she asked after a while. I'd been thinking the same thing. We were able to laugh about it, but it didn't change the fact that something about this place really didn't feel right. That evening, we were invited to dinner at the Millers. At first, I didn't want to go with my parents, but I felt like it might be a good way to find out more about Harry and Sutton, so I went along. Mom bought a bottle of her favorite wine. She'd gotten a box full from the city before we moved, and the Millers were ecstatic about it. We sat down by their dinner table, which was already filled with lots of appetizers and decorations. The people here were great hosts. You have to give him that. Mr. Miller opened the wine and poured everyone, including me, a glass. "This is fantastic. I don't remember the last time I had wine this good, Mrs." Miller exclaimed. "I'm glad you like it," my mother said. "I still have a few bottles, if you'd like one for another time." No, I wouldn't want to take the last memories you have from home." "Oh, don't worry. I can order more once we're out." The Millers exchanged a strange glance but didn't comment any further. Ethan, the father, suddenly shouted, "We are starting dinner." He looked at us, apologetically. Our son is sometimes just so lost in his own world. We'd already started eating when he finally came to the living room. He resembled his dad with his black hair and tall stature. His mom was rather the opposite, very short with red curls. He was also dressed very casually in a t-shirt and ripped jeans, while his parents looked like they were at a dinner party in the 50s. "Ethan, meet our new neighbors, Eli and Joanna Russell, and their daughter Avery." "Hi," he mumbled, as he said down the free chair opposite me. Ethan was the first person in Sutton that we met who didn't smile when he saw us. He was quiet the rest of the dinner while his parents, as usual, kept speaking without a pause. Towards the end of dinner, my mom decided to finally interrupt the strange couple by telling them about what we saw last night. For a moment, there was silence. The Millers looked very uncomfortable but didn't stop smiling. "That was Harry," Ethan finally said. "That's what I thought, but we really don't understand this. Does this happen more often? Does Harry have some kind of psychological problem?" my mother bluntly asked. Mrs. Miller shushed her. "Sorry, Joanna. That was rude of me," she looked around the room. "It's just we don't talk badly about Harry." "Oh, I wasn't trying to. The man was staring at our daughter at night. We were just a bit concerned, that's all. We don't want you to feel uncomfortable. Everyone here is so happy that you moved to Sutton." Mr. Miller chimed in. "It's just not simple to explain who Harry is." "Has he ever harmed anyone here?" Dad asked. Again, silence. The dinner ended quickly and awkwardly after that. We left with more questions than answers. The following day, my mom suggested we take a little day trip so we could explore nearby towns and maybe find a place with a decent grocery store. None of us admitted it, but I think that all of us were kind of creeped out and just wanted to get away for a bit. The neighbors here were open and friendly at first glance, but something was really wrong with them. I could see the regret in my parents' faces. We didn't belong here. We packed a few essentials and got in the car. We drove for 5 hours until we finally gave up. That's when we realized that there was no way of leaving Sutton. The GPS was all wrong, streets came to dead ends. We tried to drive away the same way we came, but it almost seemed like those roads were gone. The three of us felt as if we had lost our minds. Finally, we came to a long road and figured it would lead us out. The road was empty. We hadn't seen any houses for at least half an hour. There was nothing but fields. Dad pushed the gas harder, and we finally were able to breathe properly again. Until we saw something on the road. From this distance, we couldn't recognize what it was, but as we got closer, we realized it was a person, and they were slowly walking towards our direction. We came to a sudden halt right in front of him. I immediately recognized the shredded clothes and the straw. Everything about him looked fake, except for his face. A human face with thick eyebrows and thin lips. We stood there for a moment as he dragged his body towards our car. Mom locked the doors. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Then he reached his arm towards my mother's door. That's when Dad went back in reverse. When we were far enough away, he turned the car. We were almost out of gas, but still somehow made it back to our new house. When we got back, I saw Ethan sitting on their front porch with a book. My parents didn't want me to go over, but I convinced them that it was fine. They decided they would knock on some neighbors' doors to find out how to get out of town. "Tried to leave, huh?" he said as I approached. I nodded. He gave me a half smile that felt genuine. "What is going on here?" I tried to hide the panic in my voice. "You fell into the trap. Once you move to Sutton, you stay here for good. The only escape is death." I swallowed. "That's ridiculous." He shrugged. "Doesn't make it less true. We came here before to look at the house. We left after that. That was before you actually lived here. Now it's too late." A million thoughts raced through my mind, but I realized there was no use denying what he was saying. We had just driven for hours through a tiny town. I knew that he was right, even if it felt wrong. So instead, I turned to anger. Then why the fuck did no one warn us? He got up from the porch and came closer. "Because they are all insane. After the man who lived in your house died, they were just so happy to get new residents, new neighbors. They can't leave, so they try everything to get at least a little change. A little glimpse into the outside. It will probably happen to you and your parents as well soon enough. My mother cried the entire evening. My father went from reasoning to anger to silence to apologizing. We tried calling and texting people from the outside, but every time we are trapped would turn into "we are so happy." This is hell would change into "you should move here as well." The next few days continued the same. We tried to leave a few more times. By car, by foot, with bikes. While we didn't meet Harry again, we also didn't find our way out. The town felt like a maze. Slowly, weeks passed and insanity turned into everyday life. My parents started dressing and acting like the neighbors. They joined town events and made friends that were just as lost as them. Harry wanted us to stay. The townspeople wanted us to stay. And Sutton became our new reality. Have you heard of this app called Are You Being Followed? I've always been afraid of being attacked on the street at night. Despite years of working in a bar and coming home late around midnight, this fear had never left me. The pay was lousy, and the boss forbade employees to park their cars in the parking lot reserved for customers. So every night, I had to walk alone for several minutes to my car parked a little further away. One day, as I was talking to one of my friends, she told me about this application. Don't you know this app? It's called Are You Being Followed, or AYBF for short. Basically, the app detects the waves of nearby cell phones, and if the algorithm notices that a signal is following you, the app sends you a notification, she explained. Some say it also detects ghosts and supernatural creatures that give off particular waves. But I think that's bullshit to attract views on TikTok, she added. I couldn't quite figure out how it worked, but she assured me that the algorithm was never wrong, and that it had already allowed her once to be alerted early enough to be safe from a strange guy one night. I downloaded it, figuring it couldn't hurt. One evening, as I was walking down the street clutching my coat, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. It was the app that had sent me a notification, and on the screen simply appeared the message "You are being followed." I slowed down and looked around. The street was deserted, only the wind sounding in my ears. Perplexed, I continued walking, the sound of my solitary footsteps echoing around me. A minute later, I received another notification. "You are being followed." With no one behind me, I wondered if it was a bug or if this app was literally a scam. Boo. I jumped and shouted. And right in front of me was my colleague Ian, wallowing in laughter. Sorry, I couldn't help it. Here, you forgot your tips," and he handed me a few bills. "Next time you do that, I'll empty my pepper spray in your face." Safe in my car, I finally managed to laugh it off and figured that at least I had proof that the app worked. The app never triggered again after that. Until tonight. I'd just finished a long evening and was exhausted. All I wanted to do was go home and go to bed. As I was walking alone in the cold night, with just enough strength to look at the tips of my feet without falling asleep while walking, my cell phone vibrated and I picked it up, thinking someone had sent me a text message. "You are being followed." The appearance of the message caught me off guard and woke me up all at once. I looked around. There was nothing and no one around at this late hour, and the temperature was negative. I thought back to the only time it had gone off in Ian's joke. He knew perfectly well by now that I didn't find it funny, and I had made it clear that I hoped he wouldn't do it again, or he would get his ass kicked. I stood there, looking back, looking for someone who obviously didn't exist. Still suspicious, I resumed my walk, keeping my phone in my hand. After a minute, it vibrated again. "You are being followed." I looked around again, but there was nothing. I was starting to panic. I was alone, in the middle of the night, and I was beginning to think something was wrong. A paper cup was pushed by the wind and the noise startled me. "Is anyone there?" I felt compelled to say aloud. Obviously, no one answered. "If there's anyone, I'm warning you, I'm armed," I lied, trying to be as convincing as possible. When nothing happened, I started to turn around to resume my walk. And at the last moment, out of the corner of my eye, even as I turned my head, I swore I saw something moving in the shadows at the corner of an alley. It took me a while to process what I'd seen. At first, I thought it had been a cat. No, cats don't have white eyes. I walked quickly. "You are being followed." Behind me, there was absolute silence. "You are being followed." Was it the sound of bare feet on the sidewalk I just heard? "You are being followed." I clutched my pepper spray can as I took the last few steps to my car while looking around like a mad woman attacked by imaginary birds. I closed the car door and locked the doors. Finally, I managed to exhale the air I'd been holding in my lungs. I didn't wait any longer, not wanting to linger here, and started the engine. Once home, I took a shower and got ready for bed. It had been a strange night. The more I thought about it, the more I wondered why the application had triggered so many times. Wasn't it possible that there had been a malfunction, and I'd just imagined what I thought I was hearing and seeing because of the stress? After a while, I came to the conclusion that the app was bugged and that my overactive imagination, combined with my natural fear of being attacked, had done the rest. I put my mobile in my pocket and made several trips to the kitchen to throw away the remains of my dinner. My cell phone vibrated. "You are being followed." My breathing stopped. I stood there for several seconds, staring at my screen. I raised my head slowly and looked around. I inspected every nook and cranny accessible to my view without making a move. The light in my bedroom was still off. Apart from that, I couldn't see any place where an intruder might be. I made my way discreetly towards my bedroom. "Stop stressing. You said it yourself. This app doesn't work." I continued walking slowly and put my hand on the light switch just to the left of the door. I pressed it. I took a few steps inside, but without a doubt, no intruder, ghost, or monster had entered my room. As I returned to the living room, reassured, my gaze was drawn to the window and the night outside. And there I saw the pale face of a creature glued to the glass, staring back at me with the two whitest eyes I'd ever seen in my life. After a second spent trying to understand what I was seeing, I screamed in fear. The police immediately dispatched a patrol car after my panicked call. The two officers inspected the area around the house without finding anyone who resembled the vague description I'd given them, even though they seemed worried. I had obviously avoided mentioning the fact that what I had seen had white eyes and skin and a bald head. After a while, they had to leave and told me to call back if I ever saw someone at my window again. I closed all my shutters and spent the night awake, a knife resting on the living room table. When day broke, I finally got the courage to leave my house. I looked around it and saw something the police hadn't seen or hadn't wanted to tell me. Just below the window where I'd seen this thing, there were dozens and dozens of bare footprints going from left to right towards all the other windows. My daughter has been prying at the door handle every night. It's gone from adorable to disturbing. I remember the first time I heard it. Click, click. "Honey, what's that?" I asked my wife Carmen, after waking up in the middle of the night to a strange sound. "What's what?" she replied, in a groggy state, frustrated that I had woken her so late. But the sound had stopped. The next night I heard it again. Click, click. What could that possibly be? I wondered as I woke up my wife again. This time, she heard it. It sounds like the doorknob, but by the time we walked over to it, the sound had stopped. Luckily for me, back when I lived in the city, I had always gotten into the habit of locking my bedroom door, and that tradition continued well into moving into my wife's apartment and even our current home in the suburbs. The following night, we didn't hear the sound. Perhaps we were both in too deep of a sleep, or maybe it didn't happen that night, but either way, we thought the strange occurrence was behind us. Until the next night, when we heard it again. Click, click. Is that what I think it is? Carmen asked. It most certainly is, I replied, a chill going down my spine, as the recurring sound was beginning to genuinely terrifying me. This time, I tiptoed over to the door, careful not to alert whoever was turning it, and opened it quickly, only to find my 8-year-old daughter just standing there, staring at me. "Christy?" I asked. "Yes, Dad," she replied. "What are you doing, dear? You nearly scared me to death." "I missed you and Mommy." It was so adorable that I nearly forgot how creepy the sounds of the previous nights had been. That's all. But then she simply turned and walked away. "Good night, Daddy." I climbed back into bed and let out a sigh of relief, relieved that my daughter was the source of the sound. But the next day I started to think about it more, about the number of times it had happened, and how, after claiming to miss us, she simply walked away. So when it happened again the next night, I didn't open the door. Instead, I simply tiptoed over to it and listened. Click, click. I heard my daughter tugging at the door handle, twisting and turning it in a clear attempt to pry it open, while we were sleeping, or at least she must have assumed. That's when the whole thing began to actually terrify me. If she was trying to open the door and get into the bedroom while my wife and I were asleep, what did she intend to do? I became obsessed with that thought, to the point where I couldn't fall back asleep that night, and hatched a plan to get to the bottom of it. So the next night, I did what any rational parent would do when their child was uncharacteristically twisting at their bedroom doorknob every night, and left the door unlocked. And so, after pretending to fall asleep, I lay in bed, waiting, passing the time on my cell phone so as to not fall asleep. Until a few hours later, when, in the middle of the night, I heard a new sound. Not that of the door handle twisting and turning back and forth. No, this time I simply heard the sound of the door handle turning, followed by the squeaky door opening. Click. Screech. I immediately turned off my cell phone and shut my eyes, just far enough so that I could see through them, and pretended to sleep. What happened next still haunts me. Lying there in the dark, my eyes squinting, I saw the blurred shape of my daughter open the door, close it behind her, and slowly walk over to my wife's side of the bed. She must miss her mother, after all. I thought to myself, giving her the benefit of the doubt. Until I carefully turned my head just slowly enough so that my daughter didn't realize I was looking, and saw my 8-year-old daughter reach behind her and remove from her pajamas a kitchen knife. She held it up above her head and swung it down towards my sleeping wife. Not before I able to reach my arm out and catch the blade in my hand, letting out a large scream. "Christy, what are you doing?" But she didn't reply. She simply let out a loud hiss and seemingly slithered away, out our bedroom door, through the hallway, and back into her bedroom, where we heard her own bedroom door slam. We locked Christy in her bedroom that night. Before my wife drove me to the hospital, as I relayed the night's events, my impaled hand more than enough evidence to convince her of what had happened. I would like to say that after we got back, my daughter returned to normal, the sound of the door handle stopped, and we went back to being a family, living out our lives happily ever after. But when we got home early that morning, Christy had broken through her bedroom door and escaped from the house, never to be seen again. Still to this day, I wonder where my daughter might be, still locking my door each night. I can only hope that others do the same.